And it is funny how we do live in a polarized environment in which watching that video will either make you extremely mad or extremely happy, depending on your political point of view. You might get offended by the simple statistic. Have you found that response from people to any of your videos? Just people getting randomly offended by the statistics themselves?
Yeah, I think there are people who look at that, certainly, and have said to me, wow, I didn't know those numbers. Those are bigger than I thought. And sometimes with annoyance or not. And then you'll get people who will also look at our unemployment data, and they see unemployment small, and they say, oh, well, I'm glad we have those people, because otherwise who would be doing all these jobs that we need done in our economy? So I can get multiple reactions to a set of data and what to do about it. Now, myself, I'm a math guy. And I just think about immigration as kind of, instead of sort of this huge, what would I call it, religious war, I would say simply, I think most people believe we should have more than zero immigrants, and most people would say we should have less than unlimited. So all we're talking about is the number. The number and the ways in which we bring people into the country. And if the debate can be grounded in numbers, maybe we can take some of the religiousness out of the argument and start thinking about it. Now, on top of this, we have 2 million people who we admitted to the country who don't have a path to citizenship but are authorized. We've got another 500,000 people in the country who have a path to citizenship. I can't remember. I think it's 18% of our population was foreign born. The highest since essentially since the early 1900s. That's all context. And if we can make it numerical, maybe instead of screaming at each other, it's like a business deal. Maybe somebody can actually agree on what number and in what form.
So it sounds like you spent some time in Washington, D.C. talking to politicians about all of these sorts of stuff. And the impression, and I think that it's largely correct, having spent some time in Washington, D.C. myself, is that the parties have never been further apart, that there's just not a lot of bipartisan talking between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, that you will get some areas of agreement, particularly China policy. You seem to have some agreement between the Republican and Democratic Party. But the amount of talk, just general amount of talk between Republicans and Democrats, seems to have declined at an extraordinary rate, that there's actually an incentive structure that punishes people who talk across the aisle. What's your impression of that?
Yeah, I'll say two things. Number one, we've been fortunate. We've been able to have a set of bipartisan meetings to discuss the facts, more so in the Senate, Senator Romney, Senator Schumer, but we've had very conservative Republicans and very liberal, so to speak, Democrats sit with us together and go through the numbers. Now, people may process them differently, but at least I've found that there's some bipartisanship in this notion, at least of some group of people, in looking at the numbers. With that said, some politicians said this to me, which I found very interesting. We now live in a world, because transportation is so good, that everybody goes home every weekend. It's not like people's families moved to D.C. like the old days, and people were running into each other at kids' baseball games, and there was more of a sense of, I'll call it bipartisan collegiality, because people had that, I'll call it social time in which they were mixing. The second thing these politicians highlighted for me was we now have kind of this format. Back when I talked about this probably 10 years ago, cable news, now it would be podcasts and everything else, where there's more good opportunity to sensationalize things, because more voices are coming to the fore. And so between sensationalism and the lack of chance to really meet in some environment other than the dramatic environment of Congress, there has been more polarization endemic in the system, let alone the whatever level the policy disagreements really are. I find it unfortunate. And yet, there were certainly mostly bipartisan or semi-bipartisan bills passed in the last year It might have been one or two Republicans agreeing with the Democrats or vice versa. But, we did get a CHIPS Act, we did get the IRA, we did get the infrastructure bills, and I'm not going to argue whether those are good or bad. People have to assess that on their own. But there was some, okay, at least a few of us are going to agree with a few of them. CHIPS Act obviously was a little bit different than that. It was more clear. And I think that probably had a lot to do with China policy.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask you about some sort of technological issues that are arising. Obviously, this is your area of expertise, although you've suggested before that you're not a technology expert who ran Microsoft, which is a funny place to sort of be in your career. With that said, the big talk of everybody in DC, in Silicon Valley, is now about the rise of AI and how transformative AI is going to be. And the capabilities really are astonishing, although the reality is that I think the application, sort of the killer apps for AI, have not yet been developed, like how they enter daily life for the vast majority of people. Most people are kind of using them informally. Like when you use Google now, probably you're finding, you're reading the AI answer at the top of Google rather than actually scrolling through the pages of results, or you might use ChatGPT to ask it a quick question that you might not Google. But the sort of transformative effect in terms of the output has not yet been felt. How transformative do you think AI is going to be, and how quickly do you think the markets adapt to AI? How fast are businesses going to integrate this technology?
Yeah, I think it is as big as the rise of microprocessors. And with microprocessors, I guess I can include PCs, phones, all of that, the internet, and now AI. And why? Because most of the scenarios I was describing that customers were interested in when I left, they're all AI scenarios. Get me ready for my European trip, business trip. Okay, it can know what customers I'm seeing. It can tell me what our sales data is for those customers. It can show me with the most recent contacts. It can find the briefing documents that our team, it can summarize all that. It can put it together. That's a very valuable scenario from my perspective. Really game-changing in terms of making people more productive and, frankly, changing what jobs will exist in our workforce and what jobs won't. I'll give you another example that's more in the personal realm. Plan my trip. Now, you may put a little extra prompt data about yourself. Plan my trip to France. Here's my budget. I can give you a couple other things. Boom, come back with a proposed alternative. And if you've never been to France before, hey, this is an astonishing thing that you can go do. I'll give you another example. Not today. I really am interested in the interaction between changing demographics and changes in our economy and the job situation in the country. Well, right now we just try to bring together a bunch of data, and we have to do that ourselves. If we can get rid of some level of hallucination, the kind of work we do, which maybe every citizen can do for themselves, becomes easier. So yeah, whether it's business, personal, we're actually not a not-for-profit. We don't make any profit, but I pay for USA Facts with after-tax money, not pre-tax money. It's my theory that I can now say there's no government subsidy that comes through deductibility on USA Facts, which I personally think is kind of a principled thing. So there's no, if you will, tax deduction in which I pass part of the cost on to other taxpayers. So, but I see so many scenarios like that, let alone the, hey, look, we're trying to, as a scientist, we're trying to, rapidly do a bunch of experiments for, cancer research. There's just so many good examples. How many jobs can we automate? I'm a big believer that our economy is resilient. If we automate away some piece of work, a new door will open. I don't fear that because there's been so many innovations that have led to net growth as opposed to net shrinkage in what we do. So for me, I'm bullish. Now, do I realize there's, not everything's going to happen tomorrow. Not everything's going to happen tomorrow. Are things going to happen I think what happens is that people start discounting what technology can do in the long run because they're discouraged about what it may have done in the short run. I tend to see the long run is always more promising if it's the right technology, and I think this one is.
So, that raises also questions of valuation. It seems like the valuation on many of these companies is extraordinary compared to the earnings right now. The PE ratios are out of this world on this sort of stuff, and that, of course, is requiring a lot of speculation. When you were, you're the head of a massive publicly traded company, how did you deal with that as CEO? How the market was valuing what you were doing? How should people see the stock market as a reflection of the value of a company? In other words, I suppose I'm asking, how efficient are markets when it comes to the stock market?
I'll say a couple things. Number one, we versus many tech companies were always more or less valued in part on our earnings, not some grand long-term view of what our earnings might be. Some of that was built in, but Microsoft have had great earnings, from the get-go. Company was profitable essentially after the first 4 months. So there's been an earnings perspective. With that said, there's been a lot of companies that were not valued on earnings. And I'd point back to the dot-com bubble. Dot-com bubble, there were plenty of companies that wound up going away or value dramatically shrinking and getting bought. I mean, even Netscape, you can take a look at if you want to. It was a darling with a very large market cap. Now, let's say those market caps were 15, 16 million for startups with no profit that were really just barely startups. If you put 25, that was the year 2000, you put 25 years of inflation on top of 15 billion, you're not the same, but you're getting up about to the valuations we see today that don't seem right. So I just claim, if you think about it inflation adjusted, we do have precedent to what's going on. Now, do I think markets are efficient? Yeah, but they're not efficient today and tomorrow. They'll be efficient over time. So some of these valuations probably will turn out to be right. And many of these valuations, probably more, will turn out to be wrong. I think, what is it, Warren Buffett says? It's not a voting machine, it's a weighing machine or something, the markets are. So I do believe in them. And I believe people make the wrong bets are going to lose money. That's also part of, having highly functioning markets decide things.
So USA Facts, obviously, you've thrown this out there. It's getting a lot of traffic. What is your plan for the growth of that? And where have you seen the most enthusiasm in terms of age range, the people who vote? Where do you see the growth area for that?
Let me describe the kind of people. I think we will have the most and we have different products. We'd have what I call the 1 or 2 minute product, one of our articles or a quick fact checkup.